I was halfway through breakfast when the jackhammer started. On my land, right outside my kitchen window. I ran out in my slippers, bacon still on the pan, only to find HOA contractors trenching a line across my yard. No notice, no permission, no explanation. Just a smug little Karen with a clipboard saying it was common ground now. So I did what any reasonable man would do. I leased the strip of land to their rival internet provider. And I made sure the entire HOA had to stare at the competitor's billboard, planted right in the middle of their fancy cul-de-sac. And no, this isn't a movie. This is what happens when a Karen-backed fake HOA plays militia in the wrong neighborhood. Freeze frame, yep. That's me. The guy whose private well HOA Karen tapped into to illegally water her garden. What did I do? I flushed her system with sewage. And oh buddy, that was just the beginning. See, I moved to this neighborhood because I wanted peace. I work from home, I like my space, and I didn't want to spend half my life arguing over mailbox paint colors or lawn blade height with a bunch of retirees who peek at passive aggression. So I picked a house just outside the boundary of a well-known HOA. Technically adjacent, but not under their jurisdiction. That little detail? It becomes very important later. At first things were fine. The HOA people mostly kept to themselves, and I minded my business. I even helped a couple of them install routers and fix their printers. That's my thing, I work in networking. Corporate-level IT systems, remote infrastructure builds, you name it. I know routers like Karen knows Botox. But the problem started when they changed HOA presidents. Out went the reasonable guy with a mustache and a golden retriever, and in came Karen. Let me describe her for you. Clipboard always in hand, never seen without oversized sunglasses, and a default facial expression that looks like she's sniffing expired milk. She ran that HOA like it was a gated cult. Suddenly everyone was getting letters. Wrong porch paint, non-regulation wind chimes, flags too large. She fined a guy for parking his truck at an angle that disrupted neighborhood harmony. I wish I were kidding. Still, I wasn't one of her subject. I was free range. Until the day I heard the jackhammer. I'd made my coffee. I just flipped my eggs. And then, brrrrmm. The whole house shook. I looked out the window and there they were. 4 guys with hard hats and a trenching machine, digging straight across my side yard. They were laying a fiber line for the HOA's official ISP partner. One of them waved like it was totally normal. I walked outside thinking this had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe they thought the lot line was different. Nope. Karen was standing there, sipping from a metal water bottle, tapping on her clipboard like a smug little dictator. Oh hi. Don't worry, we're just laying the line. It's for the good of the neighborhood. Common ground access. I blinked. What common ground? This is my yard. She gave this fake sympathetic smile and said, well, you're technically next to us, so we just assumed, and I quote, you wouldn't mind. No notice. No permission. Just assumed I'd be cool with a private company trenching through my yard. I told them to stop immediately. The workers shrugged, said they were just following orders. Karen raised an eyebrow and said if I interfered, the HOA would fine me for deliberate disruption of neighborhood utilities. Again, I reminded her, I wasn't even in the HOA. She just smiled, like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum, and said, we'll see what the board decides. That's when I felt it. That slow, bubbling rise of fury mixed with pure, undiluted petty energy. I walked back inside, closed the door, and laughed like a man who just found a box of fireworks and a lit match. Because what Karen didn't know was that I still had every closing document from when I bought this house, including the parcel map. And that tiny, stupid strip of land she just violated? It was 100% mine. And legally, it was zoned for light commercial use. Not that anyone had ever used it that way. But that little detail? Oh, it was about to become everything. I spent the rest of that morning digging through files, scanning PDFs, and making phone calls. First to my lawyer, who nearly choked laughing when I told him what happened, and then to a very specific ISP. Not the one Karen and her board had their sweetheart deal with. No. I called their biggest competitor. A smaller company, locally run, with great service and a not-so-great relationship with the HOA. They'd tried to enter the neighborhood before but got blocked out for aesthetic reasons. I offered them something they couldn't resist: physical access. A strip of land, legally zoned, perfectly placed, and already trenched by their competition. They were very interested. The best part? I didn't even have to lie or exaggerate. I just emailed them the documents, the zoning info, and a photo of the trench cutting through my yard. They replied within an hour. When can we come see it? I scheduled the walkthrough for the next morning. Meanwhile, Karen had no idea what was coming. She was still swaggering around the cul-de-sac, telling neighbors they'd get super-fast speeds soon, bragging about how the HOA had struck a deal that made everyone's property values rise. She was proud, loud, and completely clueless. The walkthrough with the rival ISP went better than I could have hoped. They saw the trench, the layout, the proximity to the neighborhood's cable nodes, and basically threw confetti. We've been trying to break into this area for years, the tech rep told me. This solves everything. By that afternoon, we had a lease agreement drafted. 5 years. Fair market value. And a few bonus perks thrown in, like a small branded billboard and a custom install node right on the edge of my property. I signed. They signed. And just like that, the line Karen buried in my yard became her worst nightmare. I know what you're thinking. Wouldn't she notice? Wouldn't she catch on before it was too late? You'd think so, right? But no. Karen was so busy patting herself on the back and writing up new regulations about solar lights that she didn't notice the new company's equipment being delivered, or the small team of techs wiring the new box right beside the one her HOA had installed, or the discreet little post hole going in for the sign. She didn't notice anything at all until it was already done. And when she finally did, well, let's just say her reaction made the jackhammer seem quiet. But that's a story for Chapter 2. The sign went up on a Wednesday, just after lunch. Simple, clean, and elegant. White background, bold red letters. Fiber-fast internet now available. No HOA approval needed. It wasn't even facing my property. It was angled perfectly toward the entrance of the cul-de-sac, visible from Karen's prized bay window. She had no idea it was coming. The crew installed it so fast, you'd think they were running a heist. One moment the post hole was being drilled, and by the time Karen finished her daily lap of judgment around the block, it was standing tall and proud, casting a neat little shadow on her manicured flower bed across the street. The scream she let out when she saw it? Worth every second of trenching, paperwork, and pettiness. It wasn't just a scream. It was a symphony of disbelief, rage, and HOA entitlement. Like someone had keyed her Lexus with a weed whacker. I was inside, sipping coffee by the window when I saw her frozen in the middle of the street, mouth open, clipboard trembling. She stared at the sign like it had insulted her bloodline. And then she stormed straight toward my door. Now I knew she was coming. I had already locked the front gate and turned on my doorbell camera. The footage? Chef's kiss. She banged on the metal gate like I was hiding nuclear code. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "This is a coordinated attack on the HOA." She rattled the bars like an angry zoo exhibit. I leaned out the kitchen window and gave her a calm little wave. "Everything okay, Karen?" That only made her louder. "You're harboring illegal utilities. You've created an unauthorized access point." I told her she was welcome to call the city and ask about it. In fact, I encouraged her to do just that. Which, of course, she did. But the thing about Karen is, she expects the world to revolve around her version of reality. Unfortunately for her, the city doesn't operate on HOA fantasy logic. A few days later, an inspector came by, clipboard in hand, looking mildly annoyed that he even had to be there. I handed him the lease, the zoning documents, the easements, and a cup of coffee. We chatted for 10 minutes about how ridiculous HOAs can be. He left chuckling. Karen, who had been lurking behind her hydrangeas with binoculars, nearly combusted on the spot. But here's where it got fun. Fiberfast, the rival ISP, didn't just stop at one sign. They set up a small distribution hub at the back edge of my property, perfectly legal, perfectly invisible from the road, but powerful enough to serve the entire neighborhood. Then they started canvassing, offering 1-month free trials, better upload speeds, no throttling, and, best of all, no HOA contracts. And wouldn't you know it? The neighbors were sick of the existing ISP's overpriced, underperforming service. Within the first week, a dozen homes switched. By the end of week 2, that number tripled. Karen responded the only way she knew how, with unhinged HOA newsletters. I still have one printed out and framed. Subject line: "We are under attack, defend our bandwidth." It read like a wartime broadcast, warning residents not to fall for predatory discount tactics and unauthorized infrastructure. She claimed the rival ISP was unstable, dangerous, and probably spying on everyone. She even accused me of hosting a surveillance hub for corporate espionage. Meanwhile, I was just sitting on my porch, enjoying perfect Wi-Fi, watching her empire of imaginary control slowly collapse. The HOA board started to crack. One guy resigned after Karen tried to fine his wife for having non-compliant fairy lights on their porch. Another board member, an older woman with more common sense than Karen's entire bloodline, called a special meeting to discuss the situation with the internet. Karen tried to shut it down, claimed she had emergency powers. That didn't go well. Residents showed up, questions flew, tempers flared. One elderly neighbor stood up and said, "Wait, he owns that land?" And she just let them dig through it without asking. The room got real quiet. What followed was pure chaos. Karen tried to spin it, claiming the HOA had verbal consent, which was a lie. I still had the email trail where I'd asked them not to touch my property and received no reply. I forwarded it to the board. I also included a little reminder that trespassing onto private property for commercial installation? That's a civil suit waiting to happen. I wasn't bluffing. My lawyer had already prepped the documents, just in case. The board, suddenly realizing they might be personally liable, turned on Karen like rats on a sinking ship. They voted to temporarily suspend her while they reviewed her conduct. She lost her vote, her clipboard, and her HOA-approved parking spot. Karen stormed out of the meeting like a telenovela villain, sunglasses on, flipping off a neighbor on the way out. But the cherry on top came the following morning. Fiberfast returned with a final install, a small, sleek tower disguised as a modern sculpture. It was technically a functional node and a relay antenna, but to the untrained eye, it looked like a minimalist art piece. The installer even added a small plaque at the base. Connectivity for all. Karen came outside to retrieve her mail, saw the structure, and let out a sound that can only be described as a dying Roomba. She stormed across the street toward the structure, phone in hand, yelling at someone about code violations and art vandalism. The city inspector came by again later that day, confirmed it was within all zoning requirements, and left smiling. I offered him a scone. He accepted. And still, Karen wouldn't let it go. She started going door to door, trying to convince people to switch back to the old ISP. Some doors didn't even open. Others politely declined. One neighbor recorded the entire conversation and uploaded it online. Titled, "Karen Tries to Unplug the Neighborhood." It went mildly viral. Comments were brutal. My favorite read: "This is what happens when HOA power goes to your head and there's no HOA hat big enough to contain it." Karen then tried the nuclear option. She sent me a cease and desist letter, claiming I had intentionally disrupted HOA operations and introduced a rogue network. My lawyer framed it next to the zoning approval. We sent a counter notice demanding removal of the original unauthorized trench line and restitution for damage to my property. No response. And through all of this, more and more neighbors were switching ISPs. The HOA's sweetheart deal with their original provider crumbled. Their exclusivity agreement dissolved. FiberFast offered a discounted group plan, which even more residents signed onto. At this point, the only people still using the old ISP were Karen and her two loyal minions, who I'm pretty sure just liked the drama. You'd think that would be the end of it. You'd think Karen would finally throw in the towel and accept defeat. But no. That's not how Karens work. She had one more card to play. She filed a personal lawsuit against me for neighborhood sabotage, emotional distress, and public defamation. She actually paid a lawyer to file that. And just like that, things got even messier. The summons landed on my doorstep like a poorly wrapped threat, stuffed in a manila envelope with a sticker that said, "Urgent." I opened it thinking maybe it was another one of Karen's sad attempts at a cease and desist. Nope. It was the real deal. She had actually filed a lawsuit against me. The charges? Sabotage, emotional distress, loss of HOA confidence, which isn't even a real legal term, and my personal favorite, intentional disruption of neighborhood harmony. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped the envelope in my coffee. It was the most Karen thing she'd done yet, and considering her track record, that's saying something. Of course, I wasn't worried. I had the lease, the zoning laws, the photos, the emails, and about 40 neighbors ready to testify that I was the only reason their internet didn't suck anymore. My lawyer looked over the paperwork, sighed dramatically, and said, "She actually paid for this?" I nodded. He smirked. "Great. Let's bury her in paperwork." But Karen wasn't just trying to sue me. She was trying to make a statement. She wanted to scare me into backing off. Maybe even pressure me into tearing down the rival ISP equipment and begging for HOA forgiveness. Instead, she got the opposite. The moment word got out about the lawsuit, the neighborhood turned into a support group for me. One neighbor baked cookies and wrote, "Bandwidth Hero" in frosting. Another offered to let me park in their driveway if Karen tried to tow my car again. People who had been quiet for months suddenly started sharing their own Karen horror stories. There was the guy down the street who got fined for having an unapproved birdbath. Another who got a citation because his mailbox was too whimsical. One woman revealed that Karen had once knocked on her door at 7 a.m. to complain about the way she hung her Halloween wreath. The common thread? Everyone hated Karen, and now that she was going after me, the guy who had brought them freedom from buffering and overpriced contracts, they were more than ready to take a side. The HOA board, now operating without Karen's iron grip, quietly let it be known that they didn't support the lawsuit. In fact, 2 members called me privately to apologize for everything she's dragged you through. One even offered to testify on my behalf if it went to court. It was beautiful. Karen had spent so long intimidating everyone that she didn't realize what would happen when someone finally pushed back, and kept pushing. The court date was set for 3 weeks later. I was more than prepared. My lawyer had a binder so thick it could stop a bullet. Meanwhile, Karen had fired her original attorney, probably after he told her the case was doomed, and hired a new one, the kind who advertised on bus benches and wore cheap suits 2 sizes too large. The day of the hearing, I walked into that courtroom like I was attending a reunion. Calm, confident, caffeinated. Karen, on the other hand, looked like a mix between a sleep-deprived raccoon and a furious cactus. Her new lawyer stumbled through the introduction, mispronounced my name, and accidentally referred to the ISP sign as slanderous. It was going downhill fast. My lawyer stood up, laid out the zoning documents, the lease, and the HOA's original map showing I was not, in any way, under their jurisdiction. Then he showed the emails where I explicitly told the HOA not to touch my land. Then came the photos of the trenching. Then the receipts from FiberFast. Then a statement from a city inspector. By the time he finished, the judge was rubbing his temples like he was getting a migraine from second-hand stupidity. Karen's lawyer tried to argue I had acted maliciously. that I had weaponized my property against the community. The judge blinked and asked, "Are you saying he shouldn't be allowed to lease legally zoned land?" The lawyer stammered something about emotional impact and neighborhood cohesion. The judge asked him to cite a law. He could not. Then came the best moment of the day. The judge looked directly at Karen and said, "So just to clarify, you authorized a construction crew to dig through land you had no legal control over?" Karen said, "Well, it was for the benefit of the neighborhood." The judge didn't even look amused. "That's not how property law works." Case dismissed. With prejudice. Meaning she couldn't refile. My lawyer smiled like a cat that just knocked a glass off a table. Karen stood up, flustered, muttered something about judicial bias, and stormed out before the paperwork was even stamped. I left the courtroom feeling 10 pounds lighter and 50 times more smug. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been plated, garnished, and delivered with a side of vindication. But that wasn't the end. The aftermath was even better. Word spread fast. The HOA meeting that week was packed. Not because of any new regulations, but because people wanted answers. Karen, now a disgraced and lawsuit-defeated ex-president, tried to show up and reclaim her seat. She was told, flatly and in front of everyone, that she was no longer welcome. One resident stood up and read a letter they'd written titled, "How My HOA Made Me Hate My Own House." It had footnotes. Another resident brought a printed copy of the judge's ruling and passed it around like it was scripture. That was the moment everything cracked. A new motion was proposed. Dismantle Karen's pet rules. The ones she'd pushed through unilaterally. No more mailbox inspections. No more parking citations for visitors. The motion passed unanimously. Someone in the back actually clapped. Then came the second motion. Negotiate a formal partnership with FiberFast to offer their services HOA-wide. Karen tried to object from the hallway, shouting something about moral fiber and corporate sabotage, but no one even turned to look. The board passed the motion without hesitation. And just like that, the neighborhood flipped. FiberFast became the official provider. The old ISP slinked out quietly, dragging their overpriced contracts with them. My land was now officially registered as an authorized utility easement, with the full support of the board. I even received a thank you letter. Handwritten. From a board member who used to be one of Karen's loyal supporters. But the final nail in the coffin came about a month later. A real estate listing popped up in the neighborhood. A 2-story, freshly repainted home with an aggressive amount of hydrangeas in the front yard. Karen's house. For sale. The listing photos showed her standing off to the side in one shot, arms crossed, wearing the expression of someone who just swallowed a lemon whole. The listing description boasted, fast new internet and no HOA drama. The irony was so thick I nearly choked laughing. She left. Moved out quietly like a defeated cartoon villain. No farewell, no apologies, no clipboard left behind. Just a for sale sign and the legacy of the dumbest lawsuit I've ever seen. And me? I'm still here. Still sipping coffee by the window. Still enjoying uninterrupted bandwidth. And every time I glance at that sleek little sign on my property, I smile. Because nothing says poetic justice like a neighborhood running smoothly, without Karen. A month after Karen's moving truck vanished down the street and peace finally returned to the neighborhood, I found myself doing something I never thought I would, attending an HOA meeting voluntarily. No, I didn't join the board or run for president. That's a level of self-punishment I'm not built for. I just sat in the back, coffee in hand, purely for entertainment. The atmosphere had changed. People were relaxed, smiling, actually joking around. The air wasn't thick with tension or passive-aggressive sighs. It was like the neighborhood had collectively taken a long, overdue exhale. The new board president, a retired teacher named Sheila who once got fined by Karen for planting visually aggressive tulips, opened the meeting by reading a short statement. She thanked everyone for their patience during what she called the recent era of unfortunate events, and promised the board would now focus on transparency, practicality, and community respect. People clap. Real claps, not that fake two-finger HOA nonsense. I almost teared up. Almost. Then Sheila looked at me. She said, "We'd like to take a moment to thank the gentleman who, whether intentionally or not, helped spark change in this neighborhood. He reminded us all that rules don't mean much if they're built on arrogance and fear." I froze mid-sip. Everyone turned. Some smiled, a few nodded. One guy even gave me a thumbs up. Sheila added, "And also, thanks for the fast internet." That got a laugh. I gave a mock salute and tried not to melt into my chair. But if I thought that was the end of it, I was wrong. 2 weeks later, I got a knock at the door. It was a realtor. Friendly guy, clipboard in hand, flashy smile. Said he was updating the neighborhood's official listing materials and asked if I'd mind if they took a few photos of the new fiber-fast node setup on my property. I raised an eyebrow. He added, "You know, to showcase the upgraded infrastructure to future buyers. It's kind of a selling point now." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, and said, "You mean the one Karen tried to sue me over?" He grinned, a little embarrassed. "Well, yeah. But, you know, it's good marketing." I let him take the photos. Why not? My petty revenge had officially become a local real estate feature. The node, the billboard, even the sculptural Wi-Fi tower, what once caused neighborhood panic was now a bullet point under community perks. I couldn't have planned it better if I tried. The listing descriptions were hilarious. One house claimed future-proof gigabit speeds thanks to community-friendly infrastructure. Another said, "No restrictive internet contract. Service choice protected by adjacent zoning easement." My favorite? A neighborhood known for peaceful living and proactive homeowners. I nearly choked on my drink reading that one. Life settled into a weirdly satisfying groove after that. The internet was fast. The HOA meetings were tolerable. Neighbors started waving again. Kids played in the street without being glared at by someone clutching a rulebook. The aura of fear that had hung over the place like a bad cologne was gone. It was a real community now, not a gated monarchy. And me? I got a few side benefits out of the whole thing. For one, FiberFast started offering me a steep discount on service. They said I was technically hosting a public access node and wanted to keep me happy. I joked that all I wanted in life was uninterrupted streaming and no more lawsuit. They laughed and installed a backup power battery just in case of outages. I also started getting calls from people in other neighborhoods asking how they could pull off the same trick. Some were dealing with their own HOAs, some just wanted faster internet, but all of them had one thing in common. They were tired of being pushed around by people who used rules as weapons. I told them the same thing every time. Know your property lines. Know your zoning. Document everything. And if someone oversteps, don't yell, outmaneuver them. Karen taught me that. Not on purpose, of course. But still. There was one final surprise, though. Months later, I got a certified letter in the mail. At first, I thought maybe it was a last gasp from Karen, one final attempt at vengeance from wherever she'd landed. But no. It was from the city. They were doing a feature on adaptive zoning and how private-public partnerships could improve local infrastructure without government spending. Someone had nominated my property as a model case. I laughed for a full minute before realizing they were serious. They wanted to interview me. I agreed because of course I did. The article came out under the title, "A Little Land Goes a Long Way." It had a photo of me standing next to the Wi-Fi tower with a mug in hand and a half-smile on my face. They quoted me saying, "I didn't plan on becoming a zoning nerd, but then someone dug a trench through my bacon and eggs." It went semi-viral in local planning circles. City planners started emailing me. A podcast even asked me to do an episode about citizen zoning activism. I declined that one. Even I have limits. But that's how it ended, really. Not with a final battle or another explosion of HOA drama. Just peace. Stability. Fast internet. and a lesson etched into the community's memory like a trench through wet soil. Don't assume. Don't overstep. And definitely, absolutely, don't mess with someone who reads zoning maps for fun. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's a quiet hum of a Wi-Fi tower tucked behind a privacy fence, legally leased, perfectly positioned, and completely out of your reach. Karen learned that the hard way, and every time I walk past that little plaque, "Connectivity for All," I smile just a little wider. Not because I won, but because she lost exactly the way she deserved to. Slowly, publicly, and without a single person willing to fight for her on the way down. And if I ever hear a jackhammer outside my window again, well, I'll grab my coffee, step outside, and ask one simple question. Whose land are you digging on this time?